Does anyone else still have these dreams of doing their exams and failing them and not being prepared for them, even 10 years after you finish school? Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking the School Days book tag. This tag was created by the very lovely Victoria from What Victoria Read, and I have seen this being done a couple of times around the internet, but I would like to put my own spin on it in kind of the same way that a lot of people have done. One of the most common ways that I have seen people do this is to answer all of the questions about the times of day that you're in school, which I'm also going to do. I'm also only going to take the subject questions that were the ones that I did for my Leaving Cert. So we did the big three, which were English, Irish, and maths. Everybody has to do those in Ireland. But also as my optional subjects, I did German, biology, geography, and home economics. First of the time of day questions is First Bell. What was the book that got you into reading? And for me, it was Matilda by Roald Dahl. This was the first book that I had read all by myself, cover to cover. I think I would have been around 6 or 7 by the time I finished this by myself. I remember when I was in first class, so I would have been around 7, we had this kind of thing that my teacher set up called shared reading, where you would pick a book from the school library and bring it home and then read that with your parents. Either they would read it out loud to you and you would read out the next bit, or you would just read it all out yourself, or they would read it to you. But the idea of that was to kind of inspire a love of reading in the kids, help their reading skills to improve, and also to spend time with the children. I picked Matilda as my book to present at the end of it and said that basically the reason I had picked it is because I felt so like Matilda, in that we were both huge bookworms and that we both really loved reading. So Matilda, for that reason, is probably always going to have a really special place for me. The next question is break time. What is a book that you have most recently had to take a break from or had to DNF? And for me, it was With Great Disappointment, About a Girl by Lindsay Kelk. Lindsay is one of my favourite authors, and up to now I haven't had a really bad experience with one of her books. Except for this one. I don't really know what it was. I haven't officially DNF'd it. I am going to go back to it. I remember where I was in the book. I just found it really hard to get into. I found the pacing very slow, and it wasn't really speaking to me as much as her other books would have had in the past. So I thought, you know what, just take a break from it, come back in a couple of days, read something new, and you'll have a little bit of a fresh perspective when you come back. The next question is lunchtime, where we're all about the books that we love that feature food. And for me, I'm going to go with a kind of recent read. I read this in January, and it is The Little Swiss Ski Chalet by Julie Kaplan. In this series, there are some wonderful locations visited from right around the world, and in this one, we are headed for Switzerland, as you can imagine from the title. And quite a lot of the books in this series actually have got something to do with baking, cooking, food, all that kind of situation. So you have got the Little Paris Patisserie, you have got the Little Brooklyn Bakery, you've got the cafe in Copenhagen. And what I love about these books is that there's so much love, not just for each other, not just for the characters that are in it, but also for all of the food that's focused in it. And one of the things that I really loved about this one is that there is a mention of the German tradition of Kaffee and Kuchen, which is basically just sitting down together at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, ordering a coffee and having a slice of cake. If there is anything that I can get on board with, it's that. The next question is Final Bell. What is a book that you have most recently finished? The one that I just finished a couple of days ago was Circle of Friends by Maeve Binchy. This was the very first Maeve Binchy book that I have ever read. I listened to it as an audiobook and I genuinely was so blown away by it. I absolutely get the Maeve Binchy hype. I am so on board the train by now. So this one follows Eve and Benny, who come from a fictional suburb of Dublin called Knockglen. When they're older, they move into Dublin for university, and there is an accident that happens around the first day of term of university that brings them closer together with another group of students that they hadn't known from right around Dublin, and it kind of brings them closer together as well and gives them quite a lot of things to discuss in their lives. It's a really great kind of coming of age story and discovering who you are once you leave the nest of your parents' home. The next prompt is homework. So what is a non-fiction book that you have read and enjoyed recently? I don't know if enjoyed is the right word to use here, but I was completely spellbound and blown away and speechless by Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the memoir of the girl who was at the center of the Brock Turner rape trial, and seeing everything that had happened from her perspective, seeing what it was like for her on the night that it happened, what it was like for her in the following days, months, and all of that. It's such an eye opener. And I think with things that are happening in the world right now and some of the news that we're getting from the UK, it's definitely a book that everybody needs to read. This copy also has a copy of her victim impact statement, which was given on the day of the trial. I know that you can access it on BuzzFeed and you can read it on the internet, but having it in the book as well makes it so much more impactful. The final time of day question is staff room. What book do you go to when you need to take a break? I only have got a couple of copies of these here, but when I'm struggling with reading, when I'm going through a reading slump and I'm trying to kind of rejuvenate how my reading is going, I, without fail, go for The Babysitter's Club. I have an obsession with that series. That's the only way to put it. I've got a couple of the books on my Kindle. I don't have the full set, but any of them that I'm missing, I kind of go to the Amazon store and I will download a couple more of them. Breege from Rare Opal Reads also very kindly sent me California Girls and New York, New York, which are two of the summer specials that I have not read. I haven't read any of the summer specials. I haven't read any of the mysteries books. And there are a couple of like the later books that I haven't even touched. I think I've read up to the mid to late 60s of the original series, so there is definitely a lot more to catch up on. And so we go on to the subject questions, the first of which is English, where we're going to talk about one book that we studied in school and one book that we would put on the curriculum. So one of my favourite books from my school days was a play. It was Dancing at Lunasa by Brian Friel, and this was following 5 sisters, the Mundy sisters, who live in a small village in Donegal, and they're not very well to do. They're actually living in quite abject poverty. One of the sisters has a child whose name is Michael, and he's the narrator of the play. Another one of the sisters is a school teacher in the local school. One of them has a learning disability. And it's kind of about their trials and tribulations of going through life with such poverty, how they have little side businesses that we would see as a side hustle, but they see as essential for survival. Throughout the course of the play, their brother Jack returns from the missionaries in Uganda, where he's been for about 20 years or so, and he's finding it really hard to readjust to life in Ireland because it's so different from how he would have known the last 20 years. Also throughout the play, Jerry, who is Michael's father, comes back onto the scene, and you see the impact that that has had on Christine, who is his mother, and also on all of the rest of the sisters because of the implications that Jerry and Christine's relationship has. A book that I would put on the curriculum without question is Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. It's a difficult read. I am not going to shy against that. It is a very difficult thing to read. But it is also an absolutely essential book to read. It follows the story of Emma, who isn't a very particularly likeable character. She lives in a fictional village in County Cork, and she is very popular among her school friends. One evening, she goes out to a party with a couple of friends of hers and is sexually assaulted by several members of the local GAA team, which is a sports team that you would have in Ireland quite a lot around the country. And these guys are seen as the kind of heroes of the area. Because they're kind of seen as these heroes, nobody really takes Emma's side. Nobody takes her seriously. Everybody just says, well, she was asking for it. She's always been very flirty with these guys. She's always dressed very provocatively. She was drinking that night. She must have wanted this to happen. A book like that is absolutely essential for teenagers to read, to understand issues around consent, issues around sexual assault, around rape. For me, it also kind of raises a weird question in Emma is not a very likable character, but also this horrific thing is something that you would not wish on anybody, and that is definitely a subject that you can discuss with students in your classrooms. I have got another couple of books that I would definitely put on the curriculum. I've made a video about it and I'm going to put it in the cards up here if you need any more suggestions. The next subject is maths. So how do you rate your books? I am planning a video about this, but I'm going to go through it kind of quickly here. If I give a book 5 stars, it is one that I cannot get out of my head. It's one that was still swimming around my head when I put it down for like eating or going to work or at night. It's one that, without fail, I am going to reread several times. It's one that will never show up in a book haul. It's one that I'm going to bring with me wherever I go around the world. Like, there are books that I've read back in Ireland when I was 17, 18 that I still have copies of now that I've moved to Germany. They are absolute 5 stars. 4 stars is actually my most popular rating. And if a book gets 4 stars, it's very close to perfect. It might have just had a couple of things that I would have tweaked, or I enjoyed it, but I wasn't thinking about it as much as I would have thought about a 5-star book when I'd put it down. It's my most popular rating, but that doesn't kind of water down what I give a 4-star to. A lot of people would see a 3-star as a kind of negative book, but for me, it's something that I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it. So I would just take it as it was. There's a couple of things that I would change. There are a lot of things that I would have kept the same, but it was just a kind of middle of the road average read for me. If a book gets 2 stars, I'm not going to return to it anytime soon. There are quite a lot of things that were wrong with this book. There's a lot of things that I would have changed about the book. I didn't enjoy my experience while I was reading it, and it's not a book that I would keep. And if a book gets 1 star, it's basically one of the worst books I've read ever. I have given out very, very few 1 stars. I think that is because I've now gotten to a stage where I know what my reading taste is, and I know what books I would be likely to give a 1-star rating to, so those are the ones that I would kind of tend to avoid. The next subject is geography. Describe a book that has a really great world building. I thought that this question would be really difficult for me because a lot of the world building that you see is in fantasy books, and I am not a big fantasy reader. And then I remembered American Gods by Catherine McGee. This one, you need to have a really good world building section in this because it is a kind of an alternate fiction reality where instead of becoming president when the US is made independent, George Washington becomes king and all of his descendants are also monarchs. But in this book, you are following Beatrice, who is in line to become the very first queen regnant of the US. I loved this book. I loved the story about it and I love the drama about it, but also it has got really great world building where you have to suspend quite a lot of reality. And there's a lot of things about the US that we know now that wouldn't have worked if you're working with a monarchy. So Catherine McGee really does build up this whole idea of this is what it was like having all of these kings across the 200 years of the US. And this is what it's like in the capital now, which is, I think, still Washington, but under a completely different vise. It was so great to read. I'm actually reading the second book, Majesty, right now, and the really great world building does continue, and I am so into this. And my final subject is modern languages, which is ironic because the modern language that I took was German, and now 10 years later I live in Germany. So for this question, we are going to discuss the best translated fiction that we have read. I have read quite a few translated fictions. I have got a couple of copies actually of books that I have known and loved very well in English, but have been translated into German. I have got the German language versions of Matilda, of the OMG What a Complete Aisling books, of Watermelon by Marion Keyes, and of the To All the Boys I've Loved Before series. I think one of my favourite books that has been translated into English from a different language is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kazuguchi. I have discussed this one a couple of times. It's a book that I really, really enjoyed, and I am so excited to read the second book. I think it's out now, I just haven't gotten a copy of it yet. This book focuses on a cafe outside of Tokyo where if you go in and sit down at a specific table, you can travel back in time and visit somebody who has already been to the cafe. Say a friend who you've lost touch with, or a family member who's passed away and you would just like another conversation with them. But there are a couple of stipulations about your visit. You can't visit somebody who hasn't been to the cafe before, for example. And you can't stay any longer than before the coffee that you've ordered gets cold, or there's going to be some severe repercussions for you. In the book, you're following 4 people who are going back to see different people throughout their lives. And there's also a kind of a concurrent storyline of one of the workers in the cafe and what happens to her throughout the course of the book. I really loved it. I was completely blown away by this book, which I kind of wasn't expecting to be because it sounded very sci-fi fiction, and that's not a huge genre for me, but I absolutely loved it. And like I said, I cannot wait to get the second one. That is my take on the School Days book tag. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.